On the day I got married, not one member of my family bothered to show. Even my own father, who had promised to walk me down the aisle, didn't come. Instead, they all went to my sister's baby shower. The very next day, I posted a single photo on Instagram. Within less than an hour, my phone lit up with 47 missed calls and a flood of messages from them. What could have possibly rattled them so badly? Stick with me and you'll find out. They thought they were picking the safe bet in some imaginary family rivalry they themselves created. What they never realized was that the deck had been stacked against them all along, but not in the way they believed. My name's Claire, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the understudy in my sister Lila's one-woman show. My family doesn't function like a family at all. It's more like a failing hedge fund, with my mother Margaret scrambling like a panicked CEO and Lila as their one high-risk investment. Lila always seemed to do everything according to the secret family rulebook. She married Thomas, a man whose last name, Whitaker, carried the faint scent of old money, though in reality, it was more like old debts dressed up as prestige. They lived in a house where even the hedges looked stressed, trimmed into tight spirals, and conversations were rehearsed as carefully as stage lines. Her life was a polished production, and my family acted like investors, applauding and waiting for some emotional payoff. Me? I was the risky side project nobody understood. I took a different path. I chose Adrian. Adrian doesn't come from a family name that opens country club doors. He's got ink and graphite stained on his hands. Hands that literally draw whole worlds into existence. He's a comic book artist. His studio sits in the back of our little rented cottage, bathed in warm sunlight and filled with the smell of paper and endless possibility. To me, that smell was life itself, the fragrance of creation. To my family, it was just the stench of instability. They looked at his faded jeans and his quiet, steady focus, and instead of seeing the discipline of an artist, they saw a man who couldn't cut it in the real world. They couldn't imagine a life that wasn't measured by promotions, mortgages, and property values. So when I told them we were engaged, their reaction wasn't joy. It was a collective sigh, heavy with disappointment. My mother, Margaret, hit me with her trademark expression of wounded disapproval, perfected over decades of my so-called rebellions. Claire, darling, she would sigh. It's nice you found someone who shares your creative spark, but you can't hang sparks on the walls of a house you'll never own. Lila was blunter, her version of sympathy thin and fragile, like sugar glass. I'm just worried about you, she purred, glancing at her perfect manicure. It's tough out there without a proper foundation. Her foundation, of course, was the trust fund my father topped up like clockwork every time Thomas's latest brilliant scheme drained their accounts dry. Then came the ultimate move. Lila, with all the flair of a stage actress, scheduled her over-the-top gender reveal party for the exact same Saturday as my wedding. She acted like it was an unfortunate coincidence, but everyone knew it was a deliberate test of loyalty, a family power play. And like clockwork, they chose. They chose colored powder blasting out of a cannon and the promise of a Whitaker heir over my vows. Over me. Even my father, Leonard, the man who once sat with me for hours, teaching me to read, swore he'd be there. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'll be there to walk you down the aisle, sweetheart. I'll just slip away from the party for an hour." But he never showed. On my wedding day, my phone became a gallery of excuses. I sat alone in the little side room of the ivy-covered chapel we had rented, a bride waiting, watching the clock hands creep forward. Text after text rolled in, each one like a dagger dressed in polite wording. "Sorry, darling. Lila is overwhelmed and needs me." From my mother. "Thomas's parents have us trapped in conversation. Impossible to leave." From my aunt. And finally, from my father, the one that shattered me. "The celebration here is in full swing. So sorry, sweetheart. This is Lila's moment, and it's very important to us." Every message was a reminder of where I stood in this family. An afterthought, an optional extra. Someone they could cross off the schedule with a sorry and move on. They weren't just skipping my wedding. They were publicly confirming that I didn't matter. The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock. 10 minutes before, I sat staring at my reflection in the mirror. A bride with no one to walk her down the aisle. That's when Mr. Harrington appeared. He was our landlord, a retired diplomat who lived in the big house up front while Adrian and I rented the cottage in back. He'd come to the chapel to give us a gift and offer his congratulations. He didn't find me crying. He found me stone-cold calm, my phone lying face up on the little table beside me, the screen lit with unanswered pleas to my parents and sister. He glanced at it, his sharp eyes taking in the betrayal in a single look. He studied me, my dress, my loneliness, then looked down at his own perfectly pressed suit. "No," he said, his voice steady but warm. "It would be my honor, if you'll allow it, to walk you down that aisle." So instead of my father, it was the dignified man who collected our rent who took my arm and led me forward. The wedding itself was small, but the love in that room filled every corner. Our close friends celebrated with enough joy to make up for the absence of family. And when I looked into Adrian's eyes overflowing with a love that needed no stamp of approval, I realized I had all the family I needed right there. After the ceremony, as we laughed and mingled with our guests, Mr. Harrington approached us once more. "I overheard that you two aren't planning a honeymoon right away," he said kindly. He was right. We'd put Adrian's new studio lease above taking a vacation. "That won't do," he said firmly, already pulling out his phone. He made a quick call. "Jonathan, it's Davies. I'm calling about that young artist I introduced you to, the one who adapted your grandfather's journals into a graphic novel." "Yes, that's him. He just got married. A wonderful girl. Thank you, my friend." He ended the call, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "An old friend of mine, Edward Sinclair, owns a private yacht," he told us. "He insists you take it for 2 weeks as his wedding gift. The crew is already prepared to set sail." The name Edward Sinclair rang like a struck bell. He wasn't just anybody. He was a famously private philanthropist and historian. Adrian had once poured himself into a passion project for him, illustrating the story of Parrish's ancestors' expeditions. He took it on for next to nothing, not for money, but because the story had wrapped itself around his imagination. He gave Parrish's family history the same devotion he gave to the superheroes and dreamers in his own books. And now, that devotion was being returned to us in a way neither of us could have imagined. The very next morning, Adrian and I stood side by side on the deck of a yacht so beautiful it looked like it had been sculpted out of moonlight. I held a glass of champagne while the coastline melted into the distance, fading into a pale blue horizon. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo of Adrian and me with our fingers laced together, the impossible deep blue of the ocean stretching endlessly behind us. The caption was simple, almost stark. "The adventure begins." It wasn't revenge, it was a declaration. I had finally stepped out of the role of background character. For the first time, my life was the leading part. 15 minutes later, my phone looked like a slot machine gone berserk. Notifications spinning out of control, call after call, message after message. By the time I silenced it, the count stood at 417 missed calls and texts. I didn't answer a single one, at least not right away. Adrian and I laughed about it, turning the flood of desperate pings into an inside joke. 3 days into the voyage, I finally decided to pick up. The first call I answered was from my mother, Margaret. I let it ring until the very last second, savoring that tiny act of control I'd been denied my whole life. When I finally spoke, I said nothing at first. I let the quiet of the open sea spill through the connection. "Claire? Claire, darling, is that you? For heaven's sake. Where are you? We've been worried sick." Her performance was Oscar-worthy, but I wasn't buying it. They weren't worried. They were panicked. They were furious. They were staring at a story they couldn't spin, and it was eating them alive. "I'm on my honeymoon, mother," I said calmly, my voice as steady as the horizon itself. In the background, I heard Lila's sharp voice cutting in like a hissed stage direction. "Ask her about the boat. Find out who's paying for it." My mother's tone shifted instantly, her fake concern morphing into interrogation. "A honeymoon on a vessel like that? Your sister saw the pictures. We're all very curious. Does Adrian come from money you never mentioned? So it would have been useful to know." And there it was, the frantic scramble for footing. They needed an explanation that made sense in their world, where worth is tallied in bank accounts and trust funds. They needed Adrian to be a secret millionaire playing poor because the alternative, that they had misjudged everything, was unthinkable. They had to be victims of my omission, not the authors of their own betrayal. This was the moment I hadn't known I'd been preparing for all my life. I sipped my drink slowly, watching dolphins leap effortlessly through the waves. No, mother, I said, letting the words stretch out in the silence. Adrian doesn't have hidden wealth. What he has is far more valuable, something your world doesn't keep track of in its ledgers. Talent and a reputation for excellence. And those, believe it or not, are a kind of currency among people who actually matter. The silence that followed was so heavy I could almost hear her thoughts grinding to a halt. I kept my tone light, conversational. The yacht belongs to a man named Edward Sinclair. Yes, that Edward Sinclair. He's one of Adrian's clients. He was so impressed with the way Adrian brought his family's history to life that he offered us this trip as a wedding gift. And it was Mr. Harrington who arranged it all. What came from her next was a faint, strangled sound, like air escaping from a balloon. Mr. Harrington. To them, he was just our landlord, a polite older man who blended into the background like furniture. The realization that this quiet figure, someone they'd written off as unimportant, had the power to casually broker favors from a man like Parrish shattered everything they believed. Their universe was built on money and titles, not on respect or reputation. They'd never considered that true influence doesn't always wear a nameplate. Mr. Harrington? My mother repeated slowly, as if it were a word in another language. The man who owns your little cottage? The very same, I confirmed. The same gentleman who walked me down the aisle when my own father chose a cloud of colored powder over his daughter's vows. Funny thing, isn't it? When you treat people with kindness and respect, not as tools but as human beings, they tend to remember it. You and father might want to try it sometime. In the background, Lila was no longer hissing. She was screeching. This is absurd. She staged this whole thing. She set it up just to make us look bad. She did it to humiliate us. I smiled, a real smile this time. I have to go, mother. The crew spotted a whale and I don't intend to miss it. Give my regards to everyone. I hung up before they could sputter a reply. That clean break felt like cutting the final thread to a puppet master I danced under for too long. I turned toward Adrian, who was already sketching the outline of the whale against the horizon, his focus steady and unshaken. For years, my family had treated me like an afterthought, and my husband like a liability. Just ink-stained fingers and wasted potential. They never once saw the brilliance behind his work, the respect he had quietly earned. What they couldn't imagine was that this same man, sitting in his sunlit studio, was admired by people whose reach made my family's manicured little suburb look like a dollhouse. Those 417 missed calls? They were nothing more than ghosts of choices my family had made. Missed opportunities, snubbed invitations, their own rejection coming back to haunt them. They hadn't simply skipped a wedding. They had failed to see the entire trajectory of my life. And standing there, wind in my hair and the open sea stretching beyond, I finally understood the greatest truth of all. By casting me aside, they hadn't diminished me. They had set me free to sail an ocean far bigger than they had ever dared to dream.